Okay, I have a one-verse study this morning, and honestly, I think during the day and age in which we live, especially during the day and age in which we live, I think it's probably one of the most important verses in the whole of the Bible. There used to be a time when people just automatically did this and didn't question it. You know, there was a time when journalism actually existed, where journalists had to have verified sources before they wrote a story. Nowadays, anybody with Photoshop can be a journalist and write a meme and put it on social media, and it will go viral, even though it has not one scintilla of truth in it. That's where we've become. Jeremy's always talked about postmodernism, where there's really no truth. Look at society today. And I got some bad news for you, folks. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. So the verse that I want to hammer on this morning is 1Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 21. Very short verse, very poignant verse, very important verse. Okay? And it simply says this: prove all things, hold fast that which is good. Just a few words. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good. Now let's look at some definitions. The word prove is a verb. A verb is a word that's used to describe an action, a state, or an occurrence, and forming the main part of the predicate of a sentence, such as hear, become, or happen. That's what a verb is. Most of you already knew that, but I'm going to go through this anyway. Prove is a verb. It's something that you do. Okay? It's an action word. All is an adjective. An adjective is a word or a phrase naming an attribute added to or grammatically related to a noun to modify or describe it. Okay? So all is related to a noun. What noun is it related to? The very next word in the sentence. Things. Things is a noun. So all things, the adjective describes how many things you're to prove. The word all means every one or the whole number of particulars, the whole quantity, extent, duration, amount, quality, or degree. Prove all of them, of whatever they are. And things, a noun, which is a word other than a pronoun, that's used to identify any of a class of people, places, or things, a common noun, or to name a particular one of these, a proper noun. Okay, you remember this from 5th grade, right? Okay, so things is an event or action, that which happens or falls out, or that which is done, told, or proposed, any substance that which is created, any particular article or commodity, an animal, as every living thing, every creeping thing over in Genesis 1. So prove all things. Don't just prove the ones you like. Don't just disprove the ones you don't like. Prove all of them, especially now, because there are so many things that are spread around that are just bogus. And if we continue to proliferate this stuff, eventually you lose all your credibility. Okay? The next thing in the sentence is a semicolon. A semicolon has two general uses. One is to clarify a series, and that's number one, and two is to indicate two closely related sentences. Those are the two purposes of a semicolon. Most people misuse this constantly. They don't understand what it's for, and they misuse it. In a series, if one or more elements in a series contains a comma, then you use semicolons to separate them from each other. As an example, the pastors that we fellowship would include Pastor Mott, comma, the Detroit church, semicolon. Pastor Boffey, comma, the Cincinnati church, semicolon. You see how it separates each of them in the list. Okay, that's one purpose of a semicolon. The other purpose of a semicolon is to separate two closely related sentences. Okay, For the most part, you should use a semicolon in this instance only where you could also use a period. Prove all things is a sentence all by itself, but there is a closely related part to it, hold fast that which is good. So a semicolon is telling you that while prove all things is a completed thought, this other part is related to that completed thought. That's why you would use a semicolon there. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So see, that tells you something. If you understand the proper use of a semicolon and you see it, you know there's a reason for it, and it helps you to differentiate that. Okay, the next part, hold fast. In English, well, I'll tell you, I'll give you the punchline first. In Greek, this is one word. In English, it's two words. Hold is a verb, to stop, to confine, to restrain from escape, to keep fast, to retain, to maintain as an opinion. We have a verse over in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 13, where it says, hold fast the form of sound words, which thou hast heard of me in faith and love which is in Christ Jesus. So here's that whole, hang on to it. Hold it fast. The word fast is an adjective. It means literally set, stopped, fixed, or pressed close, firm, immovable, firmly fixed, as in Titus chapter 1 and verse 9. Holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince the gainsayers. Now this is direction, in Titus, this is directions to a pastor, okay? In Timothy and Titus, those are pastoral epistles. They're primarily written to assist pastors in the work that they have to do. But it's extremely important that you understand that 2 Thessalonians was not written to a pastor. These instructions were written to church members. So it's not just the pastor's job to verify things. It's everybody's job to verify things, okay? It's your job to verify me. When I stand up here and deliver a message and you take notes, we used to have a member that had been a member of the church for a very, very long time. First a member out in Las Vegas. Used to sit right here where Taylor sits. Took more notes than anyone that I have ever seen in my entire life. Every verse I mentioned, he wrote it down. And then he took it home and laid it on a shelf, and I don't think it ever got looked at again. That really doesn't do you much good. You're just going to take notes for the sake of taking notes and then not ever do anything with them. You're not really proving what I said, are you? If you're going to take the notes, then go home and look at the notes and look at what I said and make sure that what I'm saying is true. Prove all things. Prove me. Prove people you talk to. Prove all of this stuff. Make sure that it's right. So, hold fast. Okay. The Greek word here actually almost finishes the entire sentence. It's the Greek word kateo, which means to hold down fast. In various applications, have, hold fast, keep in memory, let, possess, retain, seize on, take, withhold. In Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 23, it says, let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. So there are many places in the Bible where we see this word hold fast. Now the next part, and like I said, the Greek word there actually covers this next part as well. The next part is that which. Where's my verse here? Prove all things, hold fast that which. That which. That phrase doesn't have a meaning all by itself. It takes its meaning from the surrounding grammatical context. In that which, that is a pronoun, and it is modified by a relative clause that's introduced by which. So that which generally can be replaced by the word what, or it can be replaced by the phrase the thing or the things, if it's plural. Okay? So in this verse, since that which modifies the noun all things, You could say, prove all things, hold fast what is good, or prove all things, hold fast the things that are good. If that helps you to see what it's talking about. And good, the Greek word here is kalos, meaning beautiful, but chiefly good, valuable or virtuous, better, fair, good, honest, meet, well worthy, what you would generally think of the word good as meaning. So the point is, prove, try, test, establish each and everything, and hang on to the things that you have proven to be true, honest, virtuous, etc., and just flush the rest of them. Don't hang on to those things. Now, why should we prove all things? Well, when it comes to religion, it should be pretty obvious why we need to prove all things, because there are a multitude of deceivers in the world. Look at 1 John chapter 4 and verse 1. Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits. Here you go, you're proving them. You're proving the spirits here. Try the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. There are a multitude of them. Look at Matthew chapter 24. A warning from our Lord. Matthew 24 and verse 4. And Jesus answered, this is at the beginning of the Olivet Discourse, and you know what? This passage has been used to deceive more people than probably any other passage in the Bible. And look at what the beginning, before he even starts to answer their questions, the first thing he says, take heed that no man deceive you. Why? Because there are a multitude of deceivers out there. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15, Jesus says, beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. And in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18, little children, it is the last time. And as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. It's Satan's aim to destroy all truth and replace it with his lies. That's what he's been doing since the Garden of Eden. That's what he will continue to do. And it's not just church. It's political, it's everything, the monetary system, everything that you run into. Folks, I'm going to say this a number of times during the course of this message. This is the only thing on planet Earth that you can read and trust without going crazy verifying it. Everything else that you read, you should look at it with a skeptical eye. Because in this day and age, most people that write are writing for a political purpose or for a reason of controlling folks. They are not writing truth. So prove, if all you get out of this morning is you change your attitude to the point to where when somebody says something, you got to ask the question, is that right? Is that real? I need to prove that. Then I will have done my job. Because in this day and age, people don't do that. They just pass the same thing down the line. You know, it's okay to pass jokes down the line, but when it comes to serious stuff, things that affect people's lives, prove them before you just pass them along. I used to get, finally I had to block some of the people that were doing this to me. They would read some article somewhere, and now they got to email me a link with the article. And now if I click on the link and I go to it, now I've wasted 25 minutes of my time reading an article that A, I didn't really care about to begin with, and B, I don't know if it's telling me the truth or not. There's no way that I can verify it. So I just gave up 25 minutes of my life to run off and do something like that. People that write blog posts, don't trust them. They might be right, might not be. Find out. Okay, that's actually in my next part of the sermon, so I'll get to that in a minute. But it's Satan's aim to destroy truth. In John chapter 4, John chapter 4 and verse 1. When therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John. 1 John 4:1. Finally got my old glasses back and they're not working like they used to. Got to blame it on something, right? We just read this about trying the spirits. Am I in the right? No, I'm in the wrong place. John 8:44. John 8:44. Let's go back and look at the context in this. Verse 40. Christ talking to the Pharisees. He says, "But now you seek to kill me, a man that had told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. Ye do the deeds of your father." Then they said to him, "We be not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God." Jesus said unto them, "If God were your Father, if he were your Father," intimating that he's not, "if God were your Father, ye would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from God, neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do ye not understand my speech? Even because ye cannot hear my word. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it." That's where lies come from, folks. And worldlings, if you don't mind me using that term, those that are not children of God, lie by nature. Why would you trust them? If you haven't proven them to at least be honorable in certain areas, why would you trust them, knowing that they're liars? You know, it's one of those things that you ever noticed you have to teach your children not to lie? You ever notice that sometimes you think to yourself, it'd really be easier for me just to lie my way out of this than it would to accept responsibility for something? It's a part of our nature. People do it. And people that are not God's children, that are just living out there, what do they got to lose? They have no problem lying about something. The only time they feel bad is if they get caught. So don't trust them until you've proven them. Be leery of things like this. Prove all things. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9. "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." Deceiveth the whole world. How much of the world isn't deceived? Not much. In fact, even we were deceived at one time or another, and unfortunately we can be deceived again if we're not careful. If we don't prove all things and hold fast that which is good, we can go right back to where we were. That's why this is important. Don't rest. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 14 and 15, where Paul is talking about these false teachers. It says, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Don't be surprised by people that stand in a pulpit or present themselves as a religious person being nothing more than a deceiver. Many of these people know exactly what they're doing. There's some of them that are just ignorant, that just means you don't know better. But there are some that know exactly what they're doing. They work for the God of this world. And they're going to lead you right down a path if they can, because that's their job. That's why they're here. And that's what Satan's been doing all along. Look at Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians 5 and verse 10, which says, proving what is acceptable unto the Lord. Proving what is acceptable. You see, proving what is good is the only way to acceptably serve God. It's the only way to do it. Because if you don't prove it, and you wander off into a lie and start to serve the lie, you're no longer serving God, are you? At least in that area of your life. So you have to prove this stuff. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good, and acceptable, and perfect will of God. Okay? Philippians chapter 1 and verse 10. That ye may approve the things that are excellent, that ye may be sincere and without offense until the day of Christ. And proving what is good is the only way to keep us from error. It's the only way to keep us from error. And the only way to strengthen us is to prove what's good. We're warned in the latter days that people are not going to be interested in listening to truth. We're warned that they're going to want stories that'll tickle their ears. And as a result of that, God will turn them over to their own fables so that they can believe it. And this was written to a church. Look, 2 Timothy chapter 4. Paul is writing to a minister talking about what's going on in the church in the latter days. Second Timothy chapter 4, verse 3. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned to fables. As a punishment for people not putting up with the truth and proving what they're supposed to do, God will turn them over to fables. Bunch of them out there, folks. And yet, but for the grace of God, there go we. Bad grammar, but you get the point. And we're warned in numerous places to beware of these false teachers. The New Testament is full of warnings to be afraid of these guys. Look at 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. Speaking about the latter times and speaking about Paul's epistles, he says also in all his, that's Paul's epistles, speaking in them of these things, and that's the later days, the last days, in which are some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable wrest, means twist, as they do also the other scriptures unto their own destruction. Ye therefore, beloved, seeing ye know these things before, beware lest ye also, being led away with the error of the wicked, fall from your own steadfastness. You see, Peter was concerned that the people in the church might run off with these errors. Many have. It was not an idle thing. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, we read, "For when they speak," referring to these same guys, "for when they speak great swelling words of vanity, they allure through the lusts of the flesh, through much wantonness, those that were clean escaped from them who live in error. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption, for of whom a man is overcome, of the same is he brought in bondage." And in Jude verse 11 and 12, Jude says, "Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Corey. These are spots in your feasts of charity when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. Clouds they are without water, carried about of winds, trees whose fruit withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots." This is describing unsaved men that stand in a pulpit and teach religion to folks and try to deceive them and turn them down the wrong path. And we're warned of it over and over and over again. So, we should prove all things and hold fast that which we've proven to be good. How do you do that? How do we prove all things? Well, if it's a religion type of a topic, if you pick up a book on how to do this or how to do that relative to church or whatever, check the doctrine of the man that's teaching, that wrote the book. Verify the man's doctrine. Verify that he understands truth. That's an easy way to do it, and that's what we're told in the Bible. Look at Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 20. Isaiah 8 and verse 20. "To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them." Now, we're also told over in Deuteronomy chapter 13 something about this. You will remember that when we're dealing with signs and wonders, we check the person's doctrine to make sure that their doctrine is correct. And you should do the same when it comes to any of these other sources. Deuteronomy chapter 13, "If there arise among you a prophet, or a dreamer of dreams, and giveth thee a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder come to pass, whereof he spake unto thee, saying, Let us go after other gods, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them." You see, that's leading you away from the truth. "Thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet, or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God proveth you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul." Check the man's doctrine. If his doctrine's not any good, why would you want to listen to anything else that he has to say? I remember there was one time that I was on in a jury trial. The only time they've ever let me on a jury trial. And it was, usually they would say, "We'd like to thank and dismiss Mr. Henderson." That's usually how it goes. But the one time it was a civil trial, and the plaintiff in the trial was caught lying on the stand. Made up a story, couldn't be verified. At first, you listen to, the plaintiff presents their case first, and then the defense gets his chance. So the plaintiff presents this case, and you're thinking, "Oh man, this guy's guilty as sin." Then the defense starts to tear the case apart and ends up calling that plaintiff as a witness and prove that she was lying on the stand. And in the instructions, one of the things that the judge told us before we went in to deliberate this thing was if a witness has been proven to lie on the stand, you can throw out everything they said because you don't know what was true and what wasn't, and you ain't got a way to check it. So you find one of these guys whose doctrine's bad, why would you listen to anything? Because if he's wrong, if he's willing to lie to you about that, what else is he willing to lie to you about? Okay? So check doctrine if it has anything to do with religion. We already saw the verse in 1 John 4:1 to try the spirits, whether they're of God. And we saw the verse over in 2 John 10 and 11 where it talks about many antichrists being in the world. Believe it, folks. They're out there. There's tons of them out there. And why would you trust anyone relative to anything related to church and or God if they don't even understand the true doctrine of how you get to heaven to start with? I mean, they had to twist the Bible around to get to the position that they're at, so how would you trust them with anything else? Okay? If someone's asking questions and you determine that they're seeking truth, that's one thing. But if all they want to do is argue with you, all they want to do is present their side, all they want to do is try to convince you to go down their road, there's a verse over in 2 John verses 10 and 11 that's very important. It says, if there come any unto you and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed. For he that biddeth him Godspeed is partaker of his evil deeds. So why would you bring that guy into your house to start with? Why would you take somebody that teaches false doctrine and go out and buy his books and bring him into your house? Because in essence, you're bidding him Godspeed by doing it. Now, pastors, we got a bunch of these kind of things because we need them to be able to figure out what's right and what isn't so that we can teach. But that's our job. That's what we were hired to do. And unfortunately, Ben Mott used to have I think he probably still has this saying that you got to be able to eat the chicken and throw away the bones. It takes a while to know the difference between chicken and bones. It takes a while to understand the difference in doctrine so that you can see it right away. To understand the tricks that people play so you can see it right away. So, meanwhile, prove it. Make sure it's right before you go tell somebody else. Prove it, so that when somebody like me comes along and says, "What's your source?" You know what your source is. We're going to cover that in a minute too. You know what? Early in my life, I went to school like most people do. I went to college and I got a business degree. And business degrees don't teach you anything relative to this. I didn't really learn this until I went back to school and got a history degree. Why? Because in history class, you go into the humanities part of the college and you got to start writing. And that means you've got to spend time in the library. And that means you have to understand how to find sources. Chad, you're aware of this, right? I learned more about logic and reasoning and how to study the Bible taking history classes and writing research papers than I ever did in 4 years working on a business degree. So I guess school is good for some things if you take the right classes, because certain things force you to teach. There's something else, and I'm going to make this point at the end of this study. This book is the greatest source of learning how to think logically than anything else on planet Earth. If you study this book according to the rules of Bible study, and you do not violate those rules, it will force you to learn how to think logically. That's how I got it, folks. That's how I got it. This book will do it. Why? Well, because we know there's no contradictions in the book. So you run across something that looks like a contradiction. You think to yourself, well, it can't be a contradiction because there aren't any contradictions. So now you got to open your brain up and go find more sources to figure out how to answer the question. That teaches you how to think in a reasonable, logical manner. It's a wonderful resource for that. Much more than many give it credit for. So, first off, check the doctrine. If they're talking about religion, check their doctrine. If they got the wrong doctrine, then they probably don't understand anything else about what goes on in the church, so just leave it be. Okay? And you have a pastor you can call and ask, I have a phone. Number 2, verify the qualifications of an author, regardless of whether they're writing on religion or on anything else, especially today. Verify that they have the requisite knowledge to write on the topic that they're writing on, and verify that they're not doing it for political reasons rather than something else. I'll give you a couple of examples. A person with a background and a postgraduate degree in theology is probably not the best source to go to if you want to understand how to do surgery on a brain. Just because a guy's got a PhD in theology does not mean that he knows everything there is to know about every topic on the planet. So, look at his background. There was I don't know what time it is, my clock went off. When Wendy and I first moved back to California, back in 1991, she went to work for Arco Petroleum. You don't see a lot of Arcos around here. On the West Coast, they're everywhere. It stands for Atlantic Richfield. I believe they were bought by British Petroleum here a while back. It's a major oil company. And she worked, they had headquarters. There was one in Dallas. They had a headquarters in Dallas, and they had one in Bakersfield where we lived. And they would transfer people back and forth. So they, the folks that, I made a living off of it because I was doing the appraisals for the transfer, but that's a different story. She worked in the exploration and exploitation department of Arco. Now what that means is she worked with geologists, geophysicists, and even a micropaleontologist. It was their job to locate and extract oil out of the ground and gas. Oil and natural gas, that's what they did. These were some smart guys. We ended up being friends with a lot of them because, we just did. And there's one we still hear from. Haven't seen him in 20 years or so, but, we still hear from him every year. The micropaleontologist, you know what a paleontologist is? Those are the guys that study dinosaurs and fossils. And a micropaleontologist is a guy that studies microscopic fossils. And he could tell how close they were to oil by looking at the bugs in the mud samples that would come up from the drilling. When they would drill into the ground, the stuff that came out of it, I forget what they call it, but that mud that comes out of there, he would look at it and he could tell, okay, we're about 15 feet away. Or he could tell, yeah, this is a dry hole. These guys they know oil. All right? They know oil. Now, you say, what's this got to do with anything? Well, there's a famous book that was written on the topic of our running out of petroleum and gas and what was going to happen, predictions of what was going to happen in the future based upon this. Well, when I first heard about the book, I assumed that the guy that wrote it was one of these guys, a geologist like Rusty or a geophysicist or somebody that had worked in oil and gas and knew what he was talking about, okay? Well, I researched the author. He has no background in geology. He has no background in geophysics. He went to school and got a degree in political science. His background is in political science. And he is a far left-wing advocate of the Georgia Guidestones, if you know what that means. Those things that want to limit the population to 500 billion, I think it is, or to keep nature in balance. He was an advisor to Bill Clinton. All of the things that he writes are published on far, far left-wing liberal outlets. And he was writing a book telling us that we're running out of oil. Why would you use that as a source? Why would you? If you investigated the author to see, because clearly he was pushing an agenda, had nothing to do with truth. So make sure that whoever it is that's writing or having a TV show or whatever the heck it is that you're watching, make sure that they've got the right background in order to do this. Would you go to an auto mechanic if you needed dental work done? Would you call a chiropractor if your air conditioner in your house broke? Well, maybe if you went out and tried to fix it yourself and hurt your back. Would you go to a medical doctor for investment advice? I hope not, because they're the worst. You'd be a fool if you did. Would you go to a stockbroker if you needed a new suit of clothes? And yet people do this all the time. They'll find, and it's what's really bad is they'll find something that they like. They like what's being said, and so they ignore the process to determine whether or not it was right or true or honest, because they like it. I remember there was the films that were done by what was the guy's name? Chris Pinto. The one that talked about Constantine Simogenes being the author of the Sinaiticus, and he quoted a bunch of sources. Well, I went and got the sources, and I read them, and I put them in context. And he did something that we're going to cover in just a couple of seconds on sources. I'll wait till we get there, but that was one that I really wanted that to be true. I really did. I was trying to verify that it was true, only to find out that, well, maybe it is true, but you can't prove it with the sources that he had. And you'd look like an idiot if you tried to. You get into a debate with someone like that, and they'll just make mincemeat out of you, because they're going to read the sources. You know, there's some of us, our personality styles, as most here in the room have talked to Jeremy, understand some of this stuff. Some of this comes naturally to some of us. There are some of us that this is like water rolling off a duck's back. It's just what we do. It's what we always do. And then to others, this is kind of a new idea. Never even really considered that you had to do something like that before. But it's important that we prove these things. Don't advance a position just because somebody with no expertise in that discipline wrote a book on the topic, even if you like it, even if you like what it says. If their doctrine's no good, if they don't have the right background, because you know what? In this day and age, anybody can write a book. You don't even have to go to a publishing company. As a musician, I've discussed this with some of my musician friends. You know, I can record a song and put it on and get it on iTunes. You know that? And I can do that. Now, when I was younger, you had to have a contract with a record company in order to produce what you were doing. Nowadays, you can do anything and end up making it commercial, and who knows, you might sell 3 copies of it. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. And they do the same thing with books. Anybody can write a book and get it published. It's not like it was back in the old days when you had to actually go through the steps to prove that you knew what you were talking about in order for somebody to take a risk on you. They don't care anymore. They'll make a couple of bucks off of it. Another point, make sure that you've got multiple sources before you ever set on any position. Don't run with just one source. If that's all you got, then put it on the shelf for a while until you can find another source. Make sure you've got this is one of the things that I was taught. Let's look at some verses. Deuteronomy chapter 17 and verse 6. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death, but at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. In everything, make sure you've got more than one source. Don't hang your hat on one source. Now, when it comes to the Bible, you got 66 books in the Bible. So if Isaiah agrees with 2 Corinthians, you got 2 sources right there because they were written by different authors. God's the ultimate author, but still you can compare the Bible and have multiple sources because it was written over a period of thousands of years. Deuteronomy chapter 19 and verse 15 says, 1 witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity, for any sin, and any sin that he sinneth. At the mouth of 2 witnesses, or at the mouth of 3 witnesses, shall the matter be established. Always use multiple sources. Matthew chapter 18 and verse 16. This is dealing with a brother in the church. It says, but if he will not hear thee, then take with thee 1 or 2 more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And Paul confirms this over in 2 Corinthians chapter 13. Second Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 1, this is the 3rd time I am coming to you. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. There I gave you 4 witnesses, 4 sources for that one point. Don't hang your hat on one, especially if it's not already accepted truth. Look, we know the sky's blue, right? So you don't need a whole lot of sources on that one. But if it's something that's going to be controversial, make sure you got enough sources to back it up. In a college level research paper, you need about 1 source for every page. So you write a 20-page essay for a college English class, you better have 20 sources to go along with it to prove your point. Think about this. Would a lender make a loan on a property if you only had 1 comparable sale? What do you think, Chad? You're in the mortgage business. Do you think a lender would accept that one? They're going to want more than 1. Now, you'll have to reconcile the different sources. I remember reading an article one time on this that said that if you wanted to write an article on panhandling, I think that's what it was, then you need the perspective of everybody involved. You need the perspective of the panhandler, right? The guy that's out begging for money. You need the perspective of the people that he asked for money. You need the perspective of the people that gave him money. You need the perspective of the people that refused to give him money before you can actually get a sense of the story that you're going to write. Prove all things before you go out on a limb. Again, you have to reconcile the different sources because the perspectives might be different. But never, never, never use only 1 source, especially if the author's background would suggest that he might be writing with some political bias rather than something else. And if you can't come up with more, then sit on it. Just sit still on it. I don't know how long people would ask me about those Chris Pinto videos, and I wasn't ready to give a response yet. Until I got my hands on the sources and read them for myself, I wasn't ready to make a response. Interesting story, but I don't know if it's true or not. It took me 2 years to find all the books and to actually get them in the library. Well, I got them. Now I can make a statement on it. In the meantime, just let it sit for a while. If you become known as the guy that reports false information simply because you're too quick to publish bad information or you don't do due diligence, you will lose your credibility. Don't be that guy. Just don't be that guy. Prove all things. If someone quotes an article, like in the case of the Chris Pinto things, they quote an article, go look at the article. Go look at it with your own two eyes. And don't just read the quote. Read what comes before the quote and read what comes after the quote. There are most people, I would say that most people that quote things do not expect anyone to ever go check. Because most people don't. They just assume, well, the quote's there, that's good enough. You must, Or they might go just look, might type the quote into Google and hit enter, and it might pop up. Well, there it is. That's what it says. But they don't bother to look at what comes before. Don't bother to look at what comes after. Did he yank the thing out of context? You'd be surprised how many times you can tell exactly the opposite story from what the quote says by just yanking it out of context or leaving a word out. It's done. You might see a quote that you read a sentence and then all of a sudden there's three little dots and then it continues on and it's all quoted into one. You know what that means, three little dots? That means that they took something out. Okay? They made a parenthetical statement out of whatever was before and whatever came after, and they just removed that section. Well, if you don't go look and see what the removed part says, how can you trust what's written on the page? Check it out. Eventually, if you find somebody that's honest, you'll see that every time they do it, they're right. Well, then you can take a little bit of comfort in that, right? But you'd be surprised to see how many times they're not, because more often they aren't. In other words, verify. Verify, 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 verify. You remember in our study on the Apostle Paul that he was in Thessalonica, and then when he left, he went to another place called Berea. Remember that? And he wrote about the Bereans. In Acts chapter 17, 11, and 12, he said these, talking about the Bereans, these were more noble than those in Thessalonica. The people that we're reading, that he's writing to right now. The ones that he told, prove all things, hold fast that which is good. The Bereans did that. And he told the Thessalonians to do it. They were more noble than those in Thessalonica in that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the scriptures daily, whether those things were so. That makes you more noble, folks. Prove all things. It makes you more noble than the ones that don't. And it goes on to say, therefore, because they were more noble, because they proved all things, many of them believed. You want understanding of the scriptures? Then prove the points. Somebody brings you an idea, prove it. It might be right, might not be. Find out, prove it. And understand that in this day and age, more people write to advance a political or other agenda rather than to tell truth. It's just where we are in the world. If the Bible's accurate, it's just going to get worse. 2 Timothy chapter 3. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves. Narcissism. Looks like we might be getting close, huh? Covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness. These people go to church, but denying the power thereof, denying the power of godliness. From such turn away. It's only going to get worse. Depending on your political perspective, you might think that your party tells the truth and the other party is the one that lies all the time. Don't kid yourself. You know what? The people on the other side of the fence think the same thing about you. If you're a Republican, Democrats believe that the Democrats are the only ones that tell the truth and the Republicans are the liars. Republicans believe that only Democrats are liars and Republicans tell the truth. I got a news flash for you. Both parties work for the same God, and it is the God of this world. The Republican Party presents their information to the conservative half of the country, and the Democrat Party presents their information to the liberal half of the party, and they steer the country where the God of this world wants it to go. That was something that Elder Gerald found out years and years ago. I think it was Dr. Stuart Crane that told him when he was involved in the John Birch Society, and he was against the Masonic thing, only to find out that all of the leaders in the John Birch Society were Masons. Even though they were teaching against the Masonic doctrine, they were Masons doing it. And it's no different in these other realms. That's how this world is. So prove it. If somebody from your party says something, check it out. Might be right. Might be a load of rubbish. Find out. Find out which it is. So we're back to this point. Is there anything that I can trust without doing all this work? Because this is a lot of work, folks. It's a lot of work to prove some of this stuff. And some of it you will never be able to prove. And if you can't prove it, don't advance it. Let somebody else advance it. There's always somebody else out there that's going to do it. Let them. This is the one thing you can trust. This is the one thing that you can trust without having to do all this extra work. Because we know there's no contradictions. If you see something that appears to be a contradiction, that means you're going to have to go find more sources and figure it out so that you can show that it's not a contradiction. Okay? That means, that forces you to think logically. That forces you to ask the questions that you need to ask in order to answer the question that you have in your mind. And since the Holy Spirit assists in this practice, if you're a prayerful child of God searching for truth and asking God to help you understand His Word, God's involved in teaching you how to study this Bible according to the rules that have been laid down in the Bible on how to study it. Don't think for a second that all of this is done by humans. If you're asking God for understanding, God will lead you to the understanding and will teach you how to think in a reasonable manner. It's the best source on planet Earth for this. So when you go home at the end of the day, after church, don't just close it and put it on your nightstand and wait till the next week, dust it off real quick to bring it back to church again so it looks like you read it during the week. I don't think anybody in this room does that, but I know there's a whole bunch of people in other churches that do. Read the Bible. Take the book of Proverbs. Every day, read one chapter of it. It'll take you 5 minutes. Get up in the morning with your coffee and read the, let's see, tomorrow is the 17th, so read the 17th chapter of Proverbs tomorrow morning with your morning coffee. The next day, read the 18th chapter. Go on, and when you get to the end, start over again on the 1st of June and just do that 12 times a year. You read the book of Proverbs 12 times a year, and you know what's going to happen? You're going to get wise, and you're going to learn how to prove all things and hold fast that which is good. And so for this morning, I thank you for your very kind and patient attention, and let's stand and be dismissed in prayer.